So thanks again for joining us today in our webinar series. We're here to walk you through a 9-step process to help you prepare a strong grant application to pursue business development funding for your agricultural business. And our team here today, I'm Mallory Ray. I'm based out of Columbia, Missouri, and I'm joined by Ryan Milholland and Alice Roach.
Yes, I'm with the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center as our Mallory and Ryan, and we also work with the University of Missouri.
So I'll go ahead and introduce MAFIC. So we like to just go by the acronym, but as Alice said, this is the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center. So we are a statewide network of professionals that are focused on providing free business technical assistance to agricultural producers who are pursuing value-added business ideas, expanding everything from startup to major expansion. Part of our technical assistance includes this idea of helping people evaluate financing opportunities, including grants, and we can review grant applications. So if you have any questions for us today, we encourage you to go to our website to learn more about our services. Particular questions about our presentation, put those in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation.
Yeah, so today we want you, our audience, to be part of the presentation. And so we're going to be using Menti to encourage audience participation. So at this point, if you could go ahead and open up a new browser screen on your desktop or your laptop, or you can also do that on your phone, you can go to menti.com and then you'll be prompted to add a code, and that will allow you to join our presentation. So the code is here on the screen. It's 2414429. Alternatively, if you would like to join on your phone, then you can just scan the QR code that you see up here on the screen, just like Mallory's showing, and you'll be able to access our presentation there. So throughout the presentation, we'll be posing various questions to you, and you'll be having the opportunity to add your response. While you're able to navigate to Menti, I just want to share that you do need to leave the Menti screen open throughout the presentation. That will allow you to navigate to those questions quickly whenever we do pose them. You'll also be able to follow along with the slides on whatever device you're choosing, whether it's your computer or your phone. But do please leave Zoom open. You won't be able to hear us if you close out of Zoom, so you'll want to have both the Menti screen open so you can respond to questions and the Zoom screen open so you can hear what we have to say. So let's get started with our first question that we would like to collect your input on. And in a word or two, we would like for you to describe what you think what a grant or proposal needs to be competitive. So in this case, put yourself in a grant reviewer's shoes. And if you're charged with reviewing proposals, what would you be looking for in a competitive proposal? As Mallory stated, the whole point of today's presentation is to give you some tools and strategies that you can use to prepare a competitive proposal. But before we begin sharing tips and strategies that we've used over time, we want to see what you think would make a competitive grant proposal. So awesome. As you can see, as you're entering your responses, we'll be creating a word cloud. Great. So fitting categories, an innovative project, clear need, demonstrated sales, solving a pain point. Those are terrific points. If you haven't already joined Menti, by the way, you can still refer to the instructions here at the top of the page. So it's menti.com, and then you just enter the code so you can contribute here to this word cloud. Realistic budget, that's another good point. Excellent. Well, let's go ahead and pivot into this list that Mallory and I put together. We tried to think through, if we were in a grant reviewer's shoes, what would we be looking for in a competitive proposal? So we didn't limit ourselves to one word or a short phrase. We listed 4 different points that we think are important to consider. So when you can meet all 4 of these points, we think it's a great opportunity for grant funding to really work for your business. So the first of these points is that you can demonstrate your credibility. You can do that in different ways, and sometimes the way that you choose to demonstrate credibility will vary based on your business's longevity. So if you're an established business, you've been in operations for several years, you may be able to describe your previous success as a way to demonstrate your credibility for a proposal that's requesting business expansion capital, for example. If you're a startup business, you can still find ways to demonstrate credibility. For example, you may be able to demonstrate that you've accessed land, which would be important if you're going to be producing a given product. Or maybe you've invested in research and development if you're developing a very innovative product and you want to prove that you do have the technical feasibility there for the product that you're going to be developing. So think creatively about how you can demonstrate your credibility. The second point is you have a short-term specific funding need. Oftentimes there's a perception that grant funding can be used to start up a business and keep that business sustaining itself into the future. And really, that's not the best use or realistic representation of what grant funding can do. Instead, it's more important to view grant funding as a short-term infusion of funds that you can use to focus on a very specific project or initiative in your business. So it's not the grant that's in the driver's seat for the business. It's the business that's driving the business, and grants are just a supplemental source of funds to focus on a particular project. The third point is that you have time to develop a proposal. So the writing process and the thinking process that goes into developing a grant can be rather extensive. So you want to make sure that you have the time and the effort to put forth in developing a good proposal. If you don't feel like you have the time, then it's oftentimes best to just wait until another funding cycle rolls around and then reassess whether you do have the capacity to develop a proposal. And then the last point is that you have a concept and a proposal that will compete. So this is referring to the nature of the project and also the quality of the proposal itself. So when you're thinking about the concept, is it one that is technically feasible? Is it one that will offer near-term opportunities for success? And when you think about the proposal, are you explaining your concept in such a way that it makes sense and is clear to someone who doesn't know anything about you, your business, or the project that you have in mind? So when you think through these items, it'll help you develop a more competitive proposal. So now we'll pivot into those 9 steps that Mallory mentioned and give you some tips and strategies that you can use along the way to develop one of these competitive proposals.
The first step is to really prioritize your funding needs. It's very alluring, this idea of grants. Grants are free money. You don't have to pay them back. You may be required to provide a match. Most grants require some kind of match, but a lot of people get very intrigued by the idea of free money, and they want to do almost anything to get free money. When we're talking about developing your value-added business, that's a very dangerous way to think. You really need to step back and think about your long-term goals. The grant should help you launch deeper into your long-term goals. So be very clear about what it is you want to achieve with grant funding, because when you have clear goals, then it's a lot easier to align those goals with grant programs. And recognize the fact that grants operate on different cycles. They're available at different times of the year. And from the time a grant becomes posted and available, it has an application window, then there's an evaluation window, and then there's a project period. And that project period can be short or long, but the entire process can be multiple years. And if you don't get a grant, then you need to be able to develop contingency strategies for how you're going to continue to move your business forward. Don't rely solely on this as the only way to finance, to scale, to start your efforts. Let's talk about step number 2. I could spend a lot of time on that, but I'll move on. Because once you've developed a really clear sense of, okay, here are my top priorities for my business. Now I need to go out and figure out where grants might be a contributor to these priorities. So, here today, we're really focusing on value-added businesses. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to see that there are several programs that are currently open right now for applications. And Ryan just shared a link in the chat to a recent publication we put together to help value-added businesses evaluate different grant opportunities to build their business. We want to highlight today, and I did a shout out to Jacob Stair from Masbida is actually with us today on the call. we've been talking about the Show Me Entrepreneurial Grants for Agriculture in our previous 2 webinars. If you missed those, you can find the recordings on our website. But this grant program does close April 28th at 5 p.m. However, this deadline is to have not only an electric submission, but 2 hard copies. So plan ahead. Whether you take those hard copies in person to Jefferson City and drop them off at the office, or whether you're putting those in the mail and allowing enough time for them to get there. But here's an example of the current grants that are open. Some of these will return, and some of the federal ones, like the Value Added Producer Grant, May 11th is not that far away. But it's okay to look at it now, and whether you apply now or you apply in the future, it's good to build your awareness of what grant opportunities are out there.
Yeah, so after you have identified a possible program that might meet your needs, the next step is to navigate that grant program's RFP. So an RFP is a request for proposals, or it's also called a request for applications. And in that RFP or RFA, the grant program itself outlines all the program guidelines that you need to know. So it outlines the program priorities, who's eligible to apply, what types of projects are eligible to apply, how you may use grant funds. And so when you have one of these RFPs in hand, do your best to read it carefully and take a highlighter to it and highlight all the key points that you want to make sure that you have understood well. And then the next step is to really cross-reference what the grant program wants to fund and what you want to achieve with grant funding. So it's important to take some time here and really reflect to see whether there's a good match between what the grant program is willing to fund and what you would like to do in your business. If it's not a good fit, then oftentimes it's best to just move on and not develop a proposal, because it's too much time and effort to put into developing a proposal if you feel like the fit isn't there to begin with. And so it's best at this point, if you're not feeling really confident that this is a good grant program, to just move on and consider other funding sources, which could be other grants, could be debt financing, it could be investor financing. But it's important to be honest with yourself about how well that grant program is fitting with what your funding needs are.
And a quick side note, you want to have good fit, because if you don't, the reviewers are going to see that tension. They're going to feel that misfit, and you may go through all the effort of applying, but you're not going to have as strong of an application as that person who has a really clearly identified fit.
Absolutely. So next, we want to get your input or help you get some practice of thinking through whether a particular grant program is a good fit for a given idea. So if you've left your Menti screen open, please navigate back to that. Or if you've closed it, please go back to menti.com and enter the code that you see up here at the top of the screen. We'll run through this scenario, and then we'll want to know what you think the farm should do after you know all these details. So let's assume that the farm wants to expand cold pressed pumpkin seed oil production, but to do that, it needs an expeller press that will handle more throughput. So the farm has identified USDA's Value Added Producer Grant Program as a possible match to provide funding. And so after doing some research, the farm found that the grant program supports value-added processors and marketers, and it will pay for processing worker time, marketing campaigns, and some raw materials. So, given that information, let's see what you think the farm should do. So you'll see 3 options on your screen. You'll also be asked to enter your name and, let's see if I can oh, here we go. You'll see 3 options.
This is not terribly important. Just go ahead and go with it.
Right. So enter your name, your initials, the name that Mentimeter assigns to you. We want to know what you think the farm should do, though. So we're contacting the program administrator to clarify program requirements. You get started with writing a proposal, or you consider other funding sources. So you have a few more seconds to make your selection. Okay, so 7 individuals said contact the program administrator to clarify program requirements. No one said get started writing a proposal, and 3 individuals said consider other funding sources. So my recommendation to the farm would be to consider other funding sources, because the farm wants to purchase equipment. So in this case, an expeller press to produce more cold processed pumpkin seed oil. VAPG does not fund equipment purchases. So if the farm only had a desire to fund equipment, then the VAPG program won't be a good fit. Now, it's possible if you do contact the program administrator, then you might find out about more nuances of the program, and you might realize that you do have some associated needs with, expanding your business, and VAPG might be able to assist with that. But if you're really interested in equipment, then our recommendation would be to consider other funding sources, which I mentioned earlier could be debt financing, investor financing, or other grant programs.
So the next step, assuming you have gone through this process, and it's a really hard step to actually say, I've invested a ton of time into looking at all these grants. This really seems like it could work, but it's just not perfect, right? It can be really hard to walk away. Assuming, however, there is good alignment and you want to move forward, the next most important process before you jump into that application, you know what you need to put into the application. You've read the RFA very carefully, but now you need to pull out some scratch paper and start to plan out your project. Formalize the work that will take place, making sure it stays aligned to what the grant will fund. Oftentimes, you're going to need to organize a team. Some of these require independent contractors or consultants. If you need somebody to develop a feasibility study or a marketing study, you may need quotes from vendors to purchase different equipment or materials. And you want to make sure that those quotes offer a realistic timeline for when you could take delivery of the product and include all of the ancillary costs like shipping to your farm location. You're getting every detail you need as you build a plan. And please be realistic. You want to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. Don't create a timeline that is overly aggressive. If some of these are multi-year projects and you have to start demonstrating sales as part of your reporting process, don't assume you're going to start sales on day one of the project, right? Give yourself the flexibility to really get the project going and to scale and ramp accordingly. There's going to be hiccups. There's going to be the need to test things out and refine your processes. So again, from a reviewer's standpoint, the more realistic and feasible you can be at this stage, the more credibility your proposal has as a reader. And it actually makes sure that you're doing a very good job of accounting for all of your costs that you need, so that you're putting together an application that is really for a very manageable project. After you've done all of that very detailed on the ground work, the next step is to start translating that into the narrative, putting it back into the application template and following along the prompts. This is an exercise in persuasive writing. You have to make the case. Why is this a good investment for the funder? Value-added businesses are often very niche, like the pumpkin oil example. So it's important as you write to create a picture of your business. Pretend you're bringing the grant reviewers on site with you. Lay out what you're doing, explain the process, talk about your customers, make it a very visual process, because you're not going to be able to bring the grant reviewers on site. You may or may not be able to provide pictures as supplemental evidence, but you need to make it clear what you're doing. We've got a little example to walk through. And of course, at the last minute, you have to make sure you're following the rules for page count and font size. But we want you to think about persuasive writing. And here's an example. Assume a farm wants to expand its fresh vegetable operation to include on-farm canning. They want to do this because they want to increase sales and their profit margins. To can vegetables on the farm, they need a facility. They've already created a business plan. They've already talked to potential buyers. Now they feel ready to request funding from Missouri's SEGA Innovation Grant Program in order to build the facility. Pull out your Mentimeter, and what is the most persuasive argument the farm can use? Hooray! 5 people said the farm has letters from retailers that want to buy the canned product. Some grants require letters of commitment or letters of support. The SEGA grant does not, but this is clear evidence that the farm can put into the narrative. They have gone out and shown not only can they just expand for the sake of expanding, it's not enough to say no one else is doing it and that's why it's a good idea for us to do it. The best, most compelling evidence is to say there's market demand. There's clear market demand for this. We are well positioned to meet that market demand with this investment.
And so the next step of this 9-step process, rather, step 7 here, is to create your budget. So the budget's really critical because it's really the whole point of a grant proposal, right? You're trying to explain how you're using funding and motivate why you need funding. And so when you're developing your budget, Mallory mentioned earlier being realistic, that's super important at this stage. So you're never going to receive more funding than you request. But at the same time, you want to make realistic estimates, because if you're overinflating values to include in a budget, that's going to send up some red flags in the reviewer's eyes, and the reviewers may be hesitant to fund your proposal. So do your due diligence, seek out vendors and talk with them about what's a reasonable cost to include in the grant proposal, get bids. All of that work is really helpful, so you do create the most realistic budget possible. At this stage, also go back and reread that RFP to make sure that you're not including any unallowable expenses. So the grant RFP will be very specific about what it's willing to fund and what it's not willing to fund. If you include unallowable expenses, then that could be another opportunity for the reviewers to cast your proposal aside and choose another proposal to fund instead. Or if you're fortunate, the program administrator might reach out to you and say that you included some unallowable expenses, you need to rework your budget. But at the end of the day, the program's not going to fund those unallowable expenses, so it's just better to not include them at the outset of the proposal development. Mallory mentioned matching requirements earlier as well, but it's important to be, again, aware of what those matching requirements are to verify that you can satisfy those requirements. So you may hear dollar for dollar match mentioned in some of these RFPs, or a 10% cash match, 25% cash match. It's important to understand the implications of the matching requirements and make sure that you can satisfy those. Otherwise, the grant program may not be a good fit for you. Step 8 is revise your proposal. So at this stage, the individual who wrote the proposal will certainly want to review the draft and work through edits to strengthen it, but it's really helpful to also seek a third party's input. So you can seek out a trusted friend, colleague, mentor, extension professional, family member who isn't that familiar with what you're trying to accomplish in the proposal. And so that person can read and provide a really good independent review of your work. When you are reviewing a proposal, certainly take a look at the details. So spelling, punctuation, capitalization, other grammatical mistakes. That's important because, a professional application will not have too many of those detail-oriented type mistakes, but don't overlook the importance of double checking that the big picture makes sense. So when the proposal reviewers are taking a look at your piece, your proposal, they likely won't know you or anything about your business. And so your proposal really needs to stand for itself. So are you communicating ideas clearly? Have you organized the proposal in such a way that it's very logical to work through it and understand what you're trying to achieve? That's a really critical piece of this revising the proposal stage.
finally, it's very, very important that you submit on time. These deadlines are hard deadlines. There are no asking for forgiveness. The most grants have more applications than they can fund every single cycle, and they're looking for easy ways of discarding applications that come in late, applications that are too long, applications that are over budget. These are all sort of red flags that help a review panel get down to evaluating what they view as the strongest and making the best investment choices. If you're just now hearing about some of these grants for the first time, again, don't panic, educate yourself. Many of these grants do come back on somewhat regular cycles. You can learn, you can get informed, you can kind of clarify your ideas, and you can be ready for the next cycle. So our last engagement question, or nearly last one, is how ready do you feel to prepare a grant proposal that requests business development funding? Use your phone, give us this traffic light indication. And it's okay to use the chat. Thanks for that. So we hope that this was somewhat helpful, but if it wasn't, it was only half an hour, and there's other ways to get in touch with us. I'll let Alice kind of tell you more about that.
Yes. So we do want to just close by mentioning the Missouri Agriculture, Food, and Forestry Innovation Center again. So again, this is our new center that provides free technical assistance to Missouri's value-added agricultural producers. If you go to MissouriAgInnovation.com, you'll see a button on the homepage where you can request technical assistance. Feel free to do that, and we'll connect you with a business counselor who can help walk through your business and help answer questions and help you troubleshoot and plan and so forth. The grants related technical assistance that we offer, we do make that service available, but it is on a first come, first serve basis. So make sure you're reaching out to us with plenty of lead time if you would like to discuss a grant opportunity, so we do have a chance to help you. And I see some of you using the thumbs up or thumbs down. Please let us know whether today's presentation was helpful to you. As you probably noticed, we're using a new engagement tool. So we want to make sure that this is something that you either like, or we realize that you don't like this. And so we can incorporate your feedback when we're developing future presentations.
And we have a question in the chat. Will any of you be at the Arm to Farm conference next week? And Katie Nooner, I'm putting you on the spot because I believe you will be. Yes, Katie Nooner will be there on Monday. Debbie Kelly, another member of our center, will be there all week. So we are around, we are available. You can look for Katie on Monday or Debbie throughout the week. And another question about the presentation for review. We are recording this and we will make it available on our website. And the links that you saw in the chat today, if you haven't saved the chat before, you can go over to the 3 ellipses in the bottom of the chat. And at the top, there is a save chat option to bring those directly to your computer. We will also package those in an email that will go out with the link to the recording soon.
Yes, you can expect to receive that link to the recording and those links to our resources sometime tomorrow.
Any other questions? And feel free to say, this is what I wish we would have talked about. This is a relatively new webinar series. It is aimed at helping value-added producers improve their business. We'll be adding new sessions and seminars throughout the year. If you have a particular topic that you want us to address, let us know. No questions? You guys are making this a little too easy on us today.
Well, do reach out to Maffick if you do have questions. If you want to speak more specifically to your business, our technical assistance is one-on-one technical assistance, or sometimes team technical assistance, where you can visit with multiple business advisors. But we want to be here to help you. So let us know if we can help in any way.
Okay, thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you. Bye.